I'm looking forward to giving you this presentation. So this is our keynote. It's Testosterone, Science, and Human Dignity. I'd like to dedicate this talk to my mentor, Bill DeWolf, who was my chief, who got me out of many difficult situations by the simple phrase, always put the patient first. It's been a good way, a motto to be thinking of things, and is very relevant to what I'm going to be discussing with you now. So I've had a set of, I think, rather unique experiences in my career that have impacted my views on the nature of science and what it means to be human. I started with lizards and testosterone back in 1978, putting pellets into their brains. You see on the right-hand side, the top is a cross-section of a brain with a little white pellet down near the third ventricle, and that one worked, and one that's further out in the bottom one didn't work, so that wasn't in the sexual center. And that was my beginning with testosterone. In medical school, I learned almost nothing about testosterone, except that it caused, I was told, prostate cancer, and that men were treated with castration, which made a big impact on me as a medical student. And the traditional teaching for more than 80 years has been that testosterone is like the devil, that high testosterone caused prostate cancer, low testosterone was protective, and that if a physician were foolish enough to offer testosterone to a man with prostate cancer, it was like feeding a hungry tumor or pouring gasoline on a fire. And so I began my practice in 1988 after residency at Beth Israel Hospital, now Beth Israel Deaconess Medical Center, one of the Harvard teaching hospitals, and started specializing in male infertility, but also sexual dysfunction for men. And we had few options. And so I wondered to myself, based on the lizards, whether could men possibly be just like lizards? And the answer was yes. The responses that I had to these men, that was not something taught to me in residency at all, was rather astonishing. The men would talk about how they felt so much better. They had optimism. Their wives liked them. They had patience to play with their small children that they hadn't had for years. And of course, their sexual symptoms often, not always, but often, responded really well. So I started offering testosterone more routinely to men, and several of my colleagues told me immediately and over the next several years that I needed to stop, that what I was doing was dangerous, that it was experimental, and that the risks were large, and I was almost certainly going to be giving men prostate cancer. And I always felt, because of that, really perhaps even till today, that what I was doing was making a pact with the devil. That the men were getting benefits today and there had to be some cost in the future. How could all my teachers be so wrong? But as I started gathering data and following my patients, things just didn't add up. In 1996, we published data on prostate biopsies in men with normal PSA, but low testosterone, just to make sure they didn't have cancer before I was going to give them testosterone, because I thought that was going to make their cancers grow like crazy. And the belief was low testosterone would protect them. They should have had no cancer. On the contrary, we found a very substantial risk of cancer in men with normal PSA but low testosterone. And in 2004, together with my colleague and fellow at the time, Ernani Roden, we reviewed all the risks of testosterone for the New England Journal of Medicine, and we were stunned to find that we could not find evidence of this apparently, allegedly risky relationship between higher levels of testosterone or testosterone therapy and worrisome features of prostate cancer. The data were not there, and yet this concept was taught to medical students and residents around the world. It was a foundational medical concept, and the data didn't support it. So I had to find out, where did this idea come from? And it came from Charles Huggins, who won the Nobel Prize in 1966 for work that he did in the 1940s. And what he showed was that castration or androgen deprivation reduced the biomarker acid phosphatase in men with advanced prostate cancer. And he said that when he gave testosterone to men, their acid phosphatase went up. And he concluded his landmark paper with the sentence that testosterone injections testosterone injections drive prostate cancer, basically. His work is important. 80 years later, androgen deprivation therapy remains the mainstay of treatment for advanced prostate cancer. And I'll never forget the day that I descended the steps of the Countway Medical Library at Harvard, down into the bottom, and in the dusty archives found his original article in a bound volume from Cancer Research. And I read through that article, and my heart was in my chest. And I thought terrible things were going to happen to me, because Charles Huggins wrote that cancer of the prostate is activated by testosterone injections. And by this time, I had a large number of men on testosterone. And Charles Huggins is the patron saint of urology. He's the only urologist to have won the Nobel Prize, revered by everyone. But when I looked again through that paper that had scared me so much, what I found was that he'd only given testosterone to 3 men, and for only 14 to 18 days total. He only gave results for 2 of those 3 men, and 1 of those men had already been castrated, which meant that this landmark article that informed all of us for 80 years that testosterone activates prostate cancer was based on a single patient who received testosterone for only 14 days. This was no evidence at all. And so what was clear to me is that something was funny with the story. Clearly, when you do androgen deprivation, prostate cancer shrinks, PSA comes down. But if you raise testosterone, or men who just had higher testosterone, it appears that whatever that relationship is changes. And the prostate becomes indifferent almost to any changes in testosterone. And so, together with Dr. Traish, we developed what was called the saturation model, where all the action happens at the low end of the testosterone range. And once a maximum is reached, it's a maximum, that's it. We call that the saturation point. And the maximum is reached at a relatively low number, which today we know is approximately 250 nanograms per deciliter. And so the saturation model basically describes a relationship that has 2 parts to it. One is that things are very sensitive, the growth of these cells sensitive at low testosterone concentrations, and insensitive once enough testosterone is there. And you can make an analogy to this houseplant. If you think of the houseplant as prostate cancer and water as testosterone, if there's not enough water, it shrinks. If it's got enough water and you add more, nothing really happens beyond that. And of course, when you think about it, the story never made sense. Men get prostate cancer when we're older and our testosterone levels have declined. In all my years, I have never seen a man with prostate cancer in their 20s when their testosterone levels are at their peak lifetime levels. It never made sense. And so, armed with my clinical experience, which was growing over the years, and now with the theoretical framework for understanding that maybe testosterone doesn't need to be so dangerous for prostate cancer, I started offering testosterone therapy to men with progressively riskier prostate cancer status, starting on the upper left with men with high-grade PIN, which is considered or was considered a precancer, if you will, in men following radical prostatectomy who appeared to be successfully treated. Same with radiation therapy, which is a little scarier because the prostate is still there in situ and maybe the radiation missed the focus of cancer. Following brachytherapy, and then later men with active surveillance where they have untreated prostate cancer. They're just being monitored. And then much later, I developed enough courage based on those earlier experiences to offer to men who'd had recurrences of their cancer. When doesn't show up yet on imaging, we call it biochemical recurrence. It's just a high PSA. And men with frank metastatic disease. This is a paper that I wrote with some colleagues, published in 21, of 20 men, 7 with biochemical recurrence, 13 men with metastatic disease. Median duration of testosterone therapy was a year. And the amazing thing was that none of these men developed the rapid progression or adverse events that I'd been trained and believed until I started doing this work would happen if we raised testosterone. I was relatively comfortable until I started doing this work that localized prostate cancer, treated or untreated, probably didn't matter, but metastatic disease scared the dickens out of me. There was one death, and I'm actually going to show you that case. And so we've had this idea forever that it's like pouring gasoline on a fire. I've used that phrase myself for quite a few years out of residency as a young attending with medical students and residents. That was a very evocative image that people believed, and I believed it too until I had my own experiences. And apparently, it's not like that. And it really made me think about what I was doing and what was true. I want to show you this case. This is George. He's a 94-year-old scientist. Brain is sharp, came from out of state, called me up one day and said, I've read all your work. I've got metastatic prostate cancer. I want you to give me testosterone. If I come to Boston, will you treat me? I said, I can't promise you, but I'm happy to visit with you and talk about it. And he made his appointment, but it was canceled, and then he came a few weeks later. Why was it canceled? Because he developed ureteral obstruction bilaterally and had to have nephrostomy tubes put in, both sides. He came to visit me finally with his daughter, who was a nurse practitioner. And he was a small man, but totally with it. He had a nice tweedy jacket, and he had a bag with one nephrostomy tube in one pocket. He had the other bag for the nephrostomy tube in the other pocket. He walked okay. He had the highest PSA, 542, of any individual I had seen up to that point. He had bone scans that showed widely metastatic disease. He'd been treated previously with androgen deprivation for 6 months, but he was miserable. He was too tired to leave his home, and he stopped it. He says, Doc, I want you to give me testosterone. I'm a scientist. I've got 100 patents. I've read everything you've done. I think based on your work, it's safe. And I said, why do you want testosterone? He said, well, I used to exercise every day, and it made me feel good. I've got colleagues around the world that I used to correspond with by email, and I'm just too tired. Those were the things that gave me pleasure in life. I know I'm going to die of something, probably prostate cancer. I'm 94. But then he said something to me that just wowed me. And what he said is that while I'm alive, I'd like to live as well as I can. That phrase has stuck with me ever since. As far as I know, I'm in excellent health, but nothing is coming right in between me and the end that I know of. But we all live our days, right? And we get busy, and we don't really think necessarily in a mindful way of what it is that we're doing. And every now and again, this phrase hits me when I'm doing something that doesn't seem like it's what I should be doing, or it's making me miserable or something like that. And I too would like to live as well as I can while I'm alive. I think it has universal meaning, but it's more poignant from somebody who is really facing what he knows is a definite end. I gave him testosterone. After telling him, this could kill you today, tomorrow, in a week, he said, I'm willing to take the risk. I'll sign whatever you want. At 7 months, His daughter sent me this picture. He's sitting in the waiting room of a dentist's office. He's 95 years old. I think he looks pretty good, don't you? He died at 11 months. It's about what the nomograms would say would probably be his lifespan without testosterone, given the extent of disease, maybe even a few months longer. But he was so excited and pleased with his response. Within a month, he started exercising regularly, was corresponding with his colleagues, and had even started work on a new patent. He was so pleased, and he knew that what he had done with me was so counter to everything that was being taught that he sent me all his records, pictures from his youth, stories about what he had done, and encouraged me to tell his story, use his name. Peter was a 76-year-old man who was dying from prostate cancer. His daughter found me somehow and drove from out of state with Peter and his wife. Hospice had been recommended to them, but the family wanted him at home. And the daughter says to me, "Doctor, do you think testosterone might help my father?" And he looked so frail. And I said, "What is it that you're hoping testosterone might do for him?" And he said, "Doctor, the most important thing in the life of my family is our dinner every night. We gather around, we talk about our day. But my dad is so tired, he's so weak right now, that he sits at the table and almost immediately his head droops down onto the table itself, and he stays that way all through dinner. It's so discouraging." And I was hoping maybe testosterone might give him some strength and we could avoid that. When I took, without making any promises, I was ready to take him next door to the exam room, and on my way out, his wife says, "Doctor, I want you to know dignity is very important to us." That stopped me and made me really think about what is dignity when we talk about it in this kind of context. What was she saying to me? So the dictionary says that the word dignity comes from the Latin dignitas, and it defines dignity as the quality or state of being worthy, honored, or esteemed. Okay, I don't think that really applies to what we're talking about here. That doesn't quite capture it, does it? And the word dignity resonates for me. My parents are Holocaust survivors. My mother, Chava Rosenfarb, was an author in Yiddish, her native language, and she wrote about the Holocaust, and she detailed the ability of the human spirit to overcome what she saw as the indignities of the Holocaust. I will just add as an aside, it was her birthday last week. Her work has now been translated into Polish, and in her home city of Łódź, the third biggest city in Poland, they've declared it the year of Chava Rosenfarb. Thank you. My father, Dr. Henry Morgenthaler, fought to eliminate the indignity of women forced to undergo illegal, risky abortions by promoting safe, legal abortions in Canada. And so I want to come back to Peter and his story. So with a lot of trepidation, I gave him an injection of testosterone. I was worried, whether he got testosterone or not, I was worried by the way he looked that he might die on the car ride home, which was a few hours away. He looked that bad. And I said to the daughter, if you see something good happen, you have to understand that testosterone will wear off and it'll have to be repeated, and you'll probably have to find somebody, if you can, closer to home to help you with this. And I didn't hear back from her for 2 weeks. So I wanted to find out what happened. I was worried about him dying on the way home. And so I called her, and she said, "Dad's still with us. but the treatment didn't work. And I said, tell me what happened. And she says, well, actually, for the first couple of days, it was great. He kept his head up. It was just like before he got so sick. But then it all came back. And that's what she meant by saying it didn't work. And clearly, even though I told her this is a treatment that needed to be repeated, that hadn't registered. But his experience, I think, gives us an insight into what dignity really means. And it's the ability to hold one's head high, to live our lives even at the end in the way that we choose. Let me tell you about John. John was a 74-year-old man, also metastatic prostate cancer, who came in with his wife, also from out of state. He was on androgen deprivation therapy, and he was a cardiovascular wreck, really. He'd had 3 strokes within the last 5 years. And as they sat there in the room, John's face was completely impassive, no expression, barely able to respond to questions. His wife did all the talking. They were interested in testosterone, and I would sort of bring the conversation back to John and say, do you understand what we're talking about? And it would take him forever to respond, and all he could put out was like, yes. It took forever. When I wanted to examine him, he needed assistance both from his wife and from me to get him to stand up, and then he sort of leaned on the exam table. But what Lisa said is, the reason I'm interested to see if testosterone may help him is this isn't the person that I married. I don't know really who this is. Again, with a lot of concern and hand-wringing, I decided to offer him treatment. This is John and Lisa at 3 months in my office. John was a completely different person. He spoke fluently, easily. He was charming. He was funny. They sat close together, as you can see. They were on testosterone. And I'm a sexual medicine doctor, so of course I had to ask. I said, are you guys having sex? And they look at each other and they start giggling. Indeed, they were. At 10 months, I got the call from Lisa that he had died. He'd had a heart attack, he had complications in the hospital, and he'd passed away. And many of you, maybe all of you, have had those conversations. They're tough conversations. But there was something in Lisa's voice that was different. It wasn't like just pure grief. And of course, they'd been through multiple events in the last 5 years that probably brought this closer. But I didn't really understand what I was hearing in her voice until she said this to me. She said, John was so happy this last year on testosterone. And we're so grateful to you for giving that year to us. This is the last picture of John and Lisa together, about a month before he passed. It was her birthday. And, as physicians, we tend to see our patients as their problems. 52-year-old man with whatever it is, bursitis or prostate cancer. But of course, all of our patients are much more than that. John was an artist, a musician. He liked to bake bread, and he adored his wife, Lisa. And it's a mistake for us to think of our patients as to measure their lives by how many months or years they survived after a diagnosis of prostate cancer. If you came here for me to share with you the meaning of life, I'm sorry to disappoint you, but here's what I can tell you, is that life is measured in the small, sweet moments that make up cherished memories. Like cooking 18 lobsters at home to celebrate your wife's dinner, surrounded by dear friends. So we have the paradox. How can the benefits of testosterone therapy be considered minor. Yet these men were willing to risk their lives for it. I told every one of these men that they could die tomorrow or in a week. And every one of them said, "Sign me up." Part of the answer is the nature of research. I've spent my whole life in the world of science and research. And I can share with you, this isn't a mystery or a secret, is that study results are often messy. Researchers try to put a coherent face on their results. And despite messy data and uncertainty, what do we do in the field of medicine? We do things we're good at. We categorize, we codify, we create rules and algorithms, we publish guidelines. And now listen, guidelines, we went through this not long ago. Guidelines have been terrifically useful, but here's what's happened in the era of evidence-based medicine, which guides guidelines, is that we've placed tremendous value on these large controlled trials, and at the same time, we have devalued patient experiences and clinical expertise. And it makes me wonder, what is it that we have done? Have we lost our sense of humanity? Medicine is practiced one patient at a time, each with his or her own biology and life story. So how can the benefits of testosterone therapy be considered minor, yet men are willing to risk their lives for it? One answer is that group means are unable to describe the experiences of individuals. I like to say the average number of children per woman in this country is 2.3. I think it's lower now. But out of 350 million people in this country, there is not one of us that was born in a family with 2.3 children. Another way to think of it is that our tools are simply inadequate to capture the human experience. It's not what we're measuring. And what we can't measure has not been valued. And finally, data are objective, but the interpretation of data is subjective. Authors choose what to present and how to present it. So Mark Twain, more than 100 years ago, wrote, "Be careful about reading health books, you may die of a misprint." And I would suggest to you the same may be true of reading medical studies. On my very first day of medical school, Dean Fetterman, our Dean of Medical Education, said to us, "Welcome," gave the usual little spiel, and they said, "Study hard. But realize that in 10 years, about half of what you've learned will turn out to be wrong or obsolete." This has been one of the themes of my own professional career. And so I think if one is really interested and dedicated to science, it is incumbent upon us to challenge assumptions. And let me just share with you a few of the lessons that I've learned from this journey, if you will. Number one, science is ever changing. Even foundational concepts may turn out to be incorrect. Two, quality of life is more important to some individuals than quantity or duration. That's their choice, not their doctor's choice. And clearly, to me, testosterone deficiency is a reduced state of the human condition. But the greatest lesson is that choosing how we wish to die is really a decision about how we wish to live. Like George said, "While I'm alive, I'd like to live as well as I can." And where is it written that all men with advanced prostate cancer must be condemned to live out the rest of their days without testosterone, weak, tired, and sexless? It's not how I would like to do it. I want to close with a passage from my mother's book called The Tree of Life. translated from Yiddish to English by my sister, Goldie Morgenthaler, who's a professor at the University of Lethbridge in Alberta. And The Tree of Life is a historical fiction. The facts are correct, the characters are made up. And it details what happened in the Lodz ghetto over 4 years until it was liquidated in 1944. And near the end, like my mother and my father, there's a couple of families that are hiding behind a fake wall, trying to avoid capture and detection by the Nazis as they're liquidating the ghetto. The character, Michal Levine's wife, is pregnant, and he writes a letter to his unborn child, anticipating that he may not make it and survive. And his plan was to take this letter and to bury it in the morning so that hopefully someone would return and come back and discover it. And if the child were born and survived, would know a little bit about their family. And the beginning of the note or letter is, this is who your grandmother was, your grandfather, your cousins are these names, you came from this town, and all this. And at the end, he writes a little philosophy. Life is complicated and mysterious. Life is painful and short. Life is easy and simple, joyful and rich. Don't shorten it. Shorten your brother's pain, expand his joy as much as you can in order that he may do the same for you. Care. Care. Become another kind of Cain. Rise from the ground and answer God with glee. My brother Abel is alive, and I am his keeper. We all are the keepers of our brothers and our sisters. And I want to say to you that all of you who are involved in healthcare are already working to benefit humankind, whether you think of it that way or not. You should be very proud of the work you do. The impact that you have on your patients ripples out in ways that you may never know. And when we are faced with uncertainty, which is every day, let us then choose to err on the side of promoting human dignity. Thank you very much.